Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi Zevachim Lamed Hey. We begin 11 lines off the top of the Amid. So yesterday we left off that according to Rabbi Yehuda, once a year they would collect the remnants of blood that was on the floor of the Azara, collect it in a container and apply it to the Mizbeach to address a possible situation where some blood of a carbon had spilled on the floor. So this would accommodate that and solve that. Rabbanan disagreed. In any case, Amalem Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda turns to the Rabbanan. Well, the Zevachim, according to your opinion, there was no need to collect this blood. It was useless. It was pointless. Lama Paikikin Ha'azora. So why is it so that on Erev Pesach, it is discussed elsewhere that they would plug up the drain. There was an amma, like a stream that was running through the Azara, where the blood was would drain out. What's the point of backing it up, of plugging up the drain so that there's a backup? What's the point? According to me, the point was to contain that spilled blood in order to put it on the Mizbeach. But according to you, it's pointless. Just let it drain out. Lama Paikikin Hazar Amrullah. Rabbanan responded to him. It was unrelated to Hakrava. It was just to it was done as a display of beauty, of adornment, to demonstrate the multitudes, the amount, the quantity of karbonis and activity that took place on that day. Amrullah, they told him, Shevachu l'vnei Aaron, it's meritorious for the Kohanim, sheyahalchu ad arkuvoiseim bedam, to allow the blood to rise, which would necessitate that they walk through the blood ad arkuvoiseim until their knees. That's why it was done. Okay, ask the Gemara, what do you mean? How could a kohen be walking on something other than the actual floor? There's a chatzitza issue. You need direct contact, as we learned the other day, right? V'adam have a chatzitza, that blood creates a barrier between their foot on the floor. Lachu, it's liquid. V'lev chatzitza, liquid does not make chatzitza because when you stand on it, it squishes away. It's not. It doesn't make that barrier issue. The snan, as we learned, hadam, v'adyoy, all these liquids, blood, ink, vadvash, honey, v'acholav, milk. If one has them upon him while he immerses in a mikveh, is there a concern that this material is getting in the way between himself and the water? So it depends. Evasion, if they're dry, chaytitzin, yeah. Then they separate, they get in the way. Lachen ein chaytitzin, but if they're simply moist and wet, there's no chatzitza issue. Okay, so that's resolved. Next question. How could the kohen be walking through the blood and have their garments become soiled, which disqualifies their garments, as we learned the other day as well? But their monai, their clothing are getting dirtied by that blood. And we learned the kohen's garments were soiled, even with blood. And he served. The service is possible. Perhaps you'll say the madlilu, they would just lift it as they would walk. You can't. It has to fit you perfectly and cover you perfectly. Vatani, as we learned, midai, the pasuk says it has to be custom fit. Kimidasai, according to his size. Shlo can be too short, too long, and even lifting it is an issue. The answer is they would lift their clothing as they were transporting the parts of the animal to the ramp of the Mizbeach, which wasn't technically regarded as an act of service and does not require the kohen to wear begadim, bigdei kahuna. So this allows for lifting as he was doing so, to get it out of the way of the blood. V'loi, really? This process wasn't really avoida. Vatani will have a brisa. The pasuk says, "V'hikir v'hakohen es hakoil." The kohen is meant to transport, bring closer. What is that? Zuhalachas avarim lekevish. It's this very, very exact process, bringing the avarim to a kevish. Apparently, it is called hakrava, it's called avoida, and requires full dress, properly dressed. Ella, rather, they would lift their clothing while they were transporting the firewood to the wood arrangement on the Mizbeach. That's not really considered an act of service, the lav avodahi, which allows for lifting of their garments. No. Now the question is, but what about during the avodah? It was full of blood. How did they get around that? How they walk when they were involved with actual avodah. They had these posts coming out of the floor, and they would jump from one to the other, thus bypassing the blood below. Says the Mishnah. We go back to Pigel, where a fellow does the shechita with an incorrect plan, thinking that he's going to serve the meat of the korban in the wrong time, or serve the blood to the mizbeach, or the fat, the emurin on the mizbeach in the wrong time. In 2-3 days' time, that makes it Pigel, and the korban is now Pasal Pigel, and if one eats it even now, he's liable to kares. Says the Mishnah, there are some conditions to that matter. If one does shechita on the korban, on condition, he's going to eat something which is not meant for personal consumption. The emurim, the fats, the kidneys, which are meant for the mizbeach. Or in the reverse, or he plans on burning on the mizbeach something which is not meant for the mizbeach, i.e. meat. And he's thinking the wrong time, right? It doesn't matter. The korban remains kosher because you can't, cross over. Meat is for people, and emurim is for the mizbeach. Rabbi Lezer Paisel, no, he says even this is considered pigel. After all, he plans on serving something to somebody beyond its allowable time. Now, you need at least a kazayis, right? So lechel davar shadarka leechel. He plans on serving the meat in a week's time, but less than a kazayis of that meat. Or ulahakta davar shlak lahakta, or fats in the mizbeach, but pachas mikazayis, less than the required minimum kosher. Once again, it doesn't really affect the korban because it's less than a kazayis. Likewise, if he combines half personal, half mizbeach, lechel chatzizayis, to eat half a zayis of meat, ulakti chatzizayis, and to burn half a zayis of the emurin in 3 days' time, once again, the korban remains safe, kosher, because you cannot join these together. You can't combine personal and mizbeach. Continues the Mishnah. What if he has a mind to eat the bone, something inedible, chutz lizmanai, that also does not make pigel. Hashechet says zevach, if he shechs the korban lechel kazayis min art, to eat a kazayis of the skin, the hard skin, which is inedible, or umina roitev, the juice, the soup which has some meat flavor in it. It's not actual meat. Umina kifa, seasonings, which you use to cook the meat, but it has just a little, some fiber, some meat fiber in there. It's bottle. It's not really significant. It's not called meat. Umina alal, or some sort of neck tendon, which is again not edible. Not some bones, tendons, veins, karnaim, horns, of the hooves. I'm going to eat all these items. One of them, the wrong time, the wrong place, kosher. The korban is kosher because they're not edible materials. And likewise, even if he had a mind to eat actual meat in the wrong time, in which case the korban does become pigel, but these above-mentioned items are unaffected because, again, they're inedible. Vein chayav and alayim, one's not liable for eating those things. Not mishum pigel, not on account of a pigel concern. V'noiser, even if they were left over for a couple of days, they don't become noiser. There's no isser of noiser of a tummy, nor if one eats these items when he's tummy. There's no liability. Another example of this, hashechet hamikdash. If one shechts an animal korban, le'echel shalil, on condition that he's going to eat the shlil, which is the fetus, the undeveloped fetus that they find inside, or shildi, or the sac around the fetus, which are things that typically people don't eat. I mean, it's technically edible, but it's not typically eaten. B'chutz, he plans on eating these, outside meaning outside place or time, right? So again, the korban remains unaffected. Loy pigel, there's no pigel, because these aren't really considered edible items. And finally, regarding birds, hamoilek. So moilek is a corresponding act to malika. So by birds, it's done with a nail. Hamoilek is a toirin. He removes the head of the bird, which is like a shchita. And he has a mind, lechel beitzein b'chutz, to eat the eggs of that bird, outside its time or place. Does it become pigel? No, like pigel, because the eggs are a separate entity. They're not, an inherent part of the bird, so that's not called pigel. Chalev mukdoshin, beitzei toirin, and therefore we say, likewise milk from a korban animal, beitzei toirin, or the eggs off the bird korbanos, Ein chayav alei mishum pigul b'neiser atami. Even if the animal itself somehow became pigul, these items are not included, not in terms of pigul, neiser, atami, because, as explained, they're not part and parcel of the actual carbon. Okay, so in the Mishnah we learned that pigul is strictly where he had in mind to serve himself something which is edible, meat as opposed to fats, meat as opposed to bones and hooves. And if he has in mind to eat those items in the wrong time, there's no pigul. But now let's say the carbon itself becomes pigul by its own virtue. He had in mind to eat the meat in a week's time. So the carbon is pigul. Says Rabbi Eliezer, in this type of situation, even a secondary item like a shlil and a shilya, so it's specific to those two items which are technically edible, the undeveloped fetus and the sac around it. So if the starting point is the fetus or the sac, you can't use that as a conduit for pigul. I'm going to eat those in a week's time. The carbon doesn't become pigul because they're not very edible. Most people don't eat them. But if he made the carbon pigul by virtue of its own deficiency, I'm going to eat the meat of this carbon, proper meat, in a week's time. Now the carbon is labeled pigul. So says Rabbi Eliezer, guess what happens? It also incorporates, it also drags in the shlil and the shilya, which are considered secondary items, and somewhat edible. So it's sort of a one-way program. They can't turn the carbon into pigul because they're just secondary, but the carbon can make them pigul as well. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, pigul b'zevach. If he generated pigul in the carbon itself, nispagel shlil. So the shlil will get dragged in, drawn along, and become pigul as well. But not in the reverse, b'shlil. If the focal point, the starting point, is the shlil itself, I'm going to eat the shlil in a week's time, that will not serve as a conduit for the animal's pigul. Lo nispagel hazevach, the carbon itself does not become pigul, and you have no pigul. Another example, the second of three examples. Pigul be'alal, now we shift to a bird. Alal is some sort of neck component, which is edible. I'm going to eat that in a week's time. Nispagel murah. So the murah, which is the zefek, which is the crop, again, hardly edible, that also becomes pigul as a secondary component. But if the starting point is the crop, you can't make pigul starting from there. B'murah, if the pigul started from the murah, lo nispagel alal. So the alal, which is edible, doesn't become pigul. Third example, pigul be'murim, nispagel parim. Parim here are the cows which are carbonites but are treated differently than your standard carbon. It's called parshanut-torah-comment. So these are the cows that are burnt. They're burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash. So the imurim of those cows, the imurim are the fats, etc., they go on the mizbeach, but the actual flesh of the parim are burnt outside the mizbeach, outside the Beis Hamikdash. So they don't really qualify for a pigul. This pigul be'imurim, but again, if he had in mind to burn the fats, which are mizbeach materials, in the wrong time, nispagel parim. Once the animal becomes, the carbon gets labeled as pigul, so the parim, the meat, the flesh, which is meant to be burnt beyond the Beis Hamikdash, which isn't really mizbeach material, it's not meant to be eaten at all. But it gets drawn along and it becomes pigul as well. On the other hand, the parim, if you had in mind to eat the flesh, which is meant to be burnt, lo nispagel imurim, the imurim don't get piguled, because, again, just like the other two cases, the flesh here is secondary. It's meant to be burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash. It's not meant for proper consumption, so you can't use that as the starting point for pigul. So in a nutshell, Rabbi Eliezer concept here is, you can have a one-way system. We have a carbon which has, two components, one primary, one secondary. You can't initiate pigul from the secondary over to the primary, but you could the other way around. If you initiate pigul on the primary, that can serve as a conduit to now spread the pigul over all its components. Big chiddush. First example was the shlil and the shilya. Okay? Continues the Gemara. Perhaps we can, prove his point from a brisa. You can have a one-way system. Leimam se'eli. So this again discusses the this is regarding the parshanut-torah-comment, right? Those cows which are meant to be burnt outside the Beis Hamikdash. So one shita says there's no pigul at all there for whatever reason, but the Chacham say you can have pigul, v'shavim. Now all agree, even the Chacham agree that in the following case there will not be pigul. If you had in mind that I'm going to eat this flesh, which is really inedible, it's meant to be burnt, or I'm going to burn them, tomorrow, the wrong time, there's no pigul. Why? Because A, they're not meant for consumption, so thinking about eating them is worthless. And in terms of burning them the wrong time, pigul is specific to mizbeach offerings. I'm going to burn it in a week's time, that's not considered pigul. My love. Now let's assume. Yeah, in these scenarios, there's no pigul. But let's say it's a slightly different scenario. But if you had in mind to offer the imurim, which is mizbeach material, in a week's time, then in fact pigul gets applied, and even the basar, even the flesh becomes pigul, because it gets drawn along. So you see a right or a blessed concept that a secondary component can get drawn along into the pigul process. No, said the Gemara. No, perhaps not. In that case, it wouldn't work either. The only case it would work, yeah, but if you had in mind to burn the fats, tomorrow, nispaglu imurim atzma. So in fact, the imurim become pigul, because that's bona fide, mizbeach material. But the parim themselves, the flesh, which is slated for burning, would not become pigul. So that sort of discounts the attempt. That's supporting Rabbi Elazar's concept. Here's another attempt, Tashma. We have a Mishnah, Meseches Mila. Parim and Esrafim, okay, back to those cows. Usirim and Esrafim, what the goats, which are meant to be burnt. Once they're turned into a carbon, there's Me'ilah, for one who misuses them for personal use. There's Me'ilah. The Shchatu, once the Shchita happens, they get elevated, upgraded. Now they're considered, carbon material. Huchshur li pasal b'tful, so if a tful touches them, they become pasal, because they're more sensitive, more susceptible to even lighter forms of tumah, like a tful who had already immersed in a mikveh but is awaiting sunset. Purim, likewise, a fellow who's yet to bring his karbanos after his purification process had almost completed. So these are now sensitive to these experiences, ubelina, or if they stayed overnight, they become pasal. My lavlinas pasal. We're assuming what stayed overnight, the flesh of these karbanos that are slated for burning. We learn from here. Let's deduce migu the pasal belina, just like actual staying overnight makes it pasal b'machshava. Likewise, thinking about that, planning that, would also make it pigul, just like in actuality. Likewise, in scheming. Right. So if you had in mind to bring the imurim tomorrow. Okay, so two parts to this carbon. There's the flesh, which is meant to be burnt outside the mikdash, and we have the imurim, the fats, etc., slated for the mizbeach. So we're assuming that when the Mishnah says lina disqualifies the carbon, we're speaking about the meat itself. If you leave it overnight, it becomes pasal. Migu the pasal belina, pasal b'machshava. Just like lina in actuality can affect the meat, likewise, a scheme, a plan, an incorrect thought, an intention, such as planning on serving the imurim to mizbeach tomorrow, invites the pigul status over the entire carbon, even the flesh becomes pigul. And that supports Rabbi Elazar's concept that even the part which is not meant for personal consumption or mizbeach consumption can be absorbed into the pigul process and become pigul. Lo linas emurim. No, the Mishnah is speaking about the imurim that were left overnight. They become pasal. Likewise, planning on doing so makes them pasal as well. But the meat, who's talking about the meat itself? Perhaps that's exempted from pigul. Says the Gemara, how can you say we're speaking about just a imurim? Hamiltani seifa. Let's have a look at the next part of the Mishnah. Kulon moyalman al beis hadesh. So these cows, these goats, if one misuses them, he's liable to me'ilah, even if it's already sitting al beis hadesh in the place where they burn it, until it's fully burnt. Until the meat becomes charred. At that point, process is over, there's no me'ilah. So clearly we're speaking about the meat. Apparently, lina discussed in the first part of the Mishnah relates to the meat as well. Not the emurim, as you had suggested. No, says the Gemara, who says? Maybe, meat the area, who's to prove? Hakadisa, Vakadisa. Perhaps the second part of the Mishnah is speaking about the meat, yeah. The first part, which speaks about lina and pigel, is strictly about the emurim. Reisha b'emurim, the first part of the Mishnah is about the emurim, but the basar is excluded from pigel, not as you had proposed. We say for basar, and truthfully the second part is speaking about the basar, so in any case there's no raya to Rebbe Lezer's concept that even meat of these animals can be considered pigel. Mesiv Rabbah. Now actually Rabbah is going to ask a question, a kasha, on Rebbe Lezer's concept that shlila and shilya can be incorporated into the broader pigel process. Ve'elu she'ein mefaglim. The following items, if one schemes about them, they will not be considered a trigger point for pigel on the korban. Ve'ein mispaglim. Likewise, they cannot be recipients of the pigel that landed on the general korban. So whether you're thinking about them or others to affect them, they're not included in the pigel process. And these are the a list of inedible items not meant for mizbeach or for a human. Tzemer shebrashi kvasim, some wool attached to the heads of the sheep of the korban, v'seir, or the hair on the goat's chin area, shebizakanta yashim, the goat beard, v'oir, the hide, v'roitev, the juice, v'akifa, the seasonings with the meat remnants, v'alal, the neck tendon, which is inedible, v'amurah, the crop of the bird, v'atzamayis, bones, v'agidim, sinews, v'karnayim, horns, v'lafayim, hooves, v'shlil, v'shilya, right, the undeveloped fetus and the sac around it, v'chalev v'mukdashim, milk from the female behema korban, ubeitz etern, bird eggs, kulan, all these items, loy mefaglim, they cannot be used to make pigel. So thinking about them, eating them, planning on eating them at the wrong time, does not make pigel on the animal. Likewise, they're not going to be recipients to accept pigel which landed on the animal as a whole. These items are not liable to pigel, to noiser, to tamei. Right? So if the behema becomes pigel, there's no curse upon eating these items. Noiser, if they're left overnight, there's no curse for that. V'tamei, if a person eats these things while he's tamei, there's no curse. Likewise, if one chooses to take any of these materials, which are not really mizbeach materials, and to offer them on an altar outside the Beis Hamikdash, there's no kares, because they're not really considered korban materials. Says Rava, let's go back and analyze one passage in this price. Loy mefaglin v'loy mispaglin. What does that mean? That any of these items can serve neither as a conduit nor as a recipient of pigel. Which means to say, let's say we spoke about the shlil. Planning on eating that in the wrong time will not make the korban pigel, nor if he thinks about the korban itself, to eat the meat of the korban itself tomorrow, the shlil does not become affected. My love, let's assume loy mefaglan hazavach. These items cannot turn the korban into pigel, and likewise, the korban cannot turn them into pigel. That's a kasher Rebbe Lezer, who says that by the shlil, although he can't turn the korban into pigel, but the korban can turn him into pigel. You can have that one-way, system. Lo, said the Gemara. Let's reinterpret the price. Loy mefaglan hazavach. True, all these items cannot turn the korban into pigel. V'loy mispaglin means machmas atzmam. They will not turn into pigel. When you have them in mind. I'm going to eat this item tomorrow, then the item does not become pigel. But perhaps, if he plans on eating the meat of the korban in a week's time, maybe these items can include it as well. If that's the case. If that's what the Brisa means to say, hadik tani. So what does the Brisa mean later on when it says, seifa, kulon, loy mefaglin, loy mispaglin, all these will not turn pigel, will not become pigel. What's the point of this repetition, if not to emphasize that there's no way to make these things pigel? Well, to make what you're asking, what about the other passage in the Brisa, which also seems to be repetitious? Why does the Bryce have to go ahead and say, well, there's no pigel applicable to these things? It's the third time the Bryce is saying it. What's the point of this addition and repetition? Ella, you know what? That's how the Bryce speaks sometimes. I did a boil misna. Since the Bryce wanted to present their exemption from Neiser V'Tamei, Tana Pigel, so it added the word Pigel, which sort of comes along as part of the the phrase. Achanami here as well, regarding the second repetition. That explains the third repetition. Regarding the second repetition, you know what? On account of the halacha next to it, so sort of phrase it together as it usually does. Achanami added the Ba'il Misn, since the Brisa wanted to present Hamal ben Bachutz, and if one serves them outside the Migdash, he's potter, so Tananami. For some reason, the Brisa also included the next part of the phrase and repeated V'chulan lo mefagel v'mispagel, and they're not going to take part in Pigel in any which way, but it isn't necessarily coming to usurp Rabbi Elazar's halacha. So basically, we tried to prove, and we didn't really come up with a proof, but certainly not a refutation. But here comes a final proof that in fact Rabbi Elazar's concept is correct. Rava Amar Afanana Mitanina. Actually, this halacha was learned in our Mishnah, that a shlil and a shilya cannot serve as a conduit, but they can become recipients of pigel. Hashach says amagdash. So back to the Mishnah. One shechts a carbon lechal shlil or shilya b'chutz, to eat these items outside. Wrong time, wrong place. No pigel. There's no pigel. Likewise, he does malika on the bird. The eggs will be eaten in the wrong place. Like pigel, there's no pigel. Vadatani. And the Mishnah goes back and sort of repeats. Chalav and Mikdashim, you should know the milk coming off the animals, ubeit iterim, or the bird eggs, ein chayav alem mishum pigel leiser v'tamei. There's no pigel leiser v'tamei on these items. Hold it. Why are we focusing only on these? We sort of omitted shlil and shilya, which was discussed a minute ago. Apparently, shlil and shilya are exceptions to the rule. Shlil v'shilya chayav. Apparently, on those items, theoretically, there could be pigel. There could be pigel. How? Apparently, this proves Rabbi Elazar's halacha to be correct. Depends which way you're going. Kan machmas hazevach. Here, meaning, when is shlul v'shilya considered pigel? When the carbon in general turned pigel, so it incorporates even these secondary items as well, which are technically edible. Kan machmas atzma. When we learn that these items cannot generate pigel, that's when he's planning on eating them, using them as a starting point. Shmamino, that proves our point. These items can serve as cannot serve as a conduit. They can't be the starting point because they're not chashav enough, they're not edible enough. But if you had in mind to eat proper meat, these items will get swept along and labeled as pigel. Tanan Hasan. So now we shift to a slightly different topic, which we're going to see ties into our brisa. So the halacha we're learning now is about im olu lo yerdu. Certain deficient karbanis, even though they should not be offered on the mizbeach, but once they're up there, they get absorbed into the system. They're not removed from the mizbeach. Nan hasan. But that's limited to certain deficiencies, which are sort of lesser deficiencies. But let's say a blemished animal, you have no business putting it on the mizbeach. Ubali mumin, a blemished animal comes right off. Rabbi Kiva machshir bali mumin. He says even a blemished animal stays up there. Not every blemish, not a blatant blemish. Kiva only allowed a slight blemish, some sort of membrane covering the eye of the animal, which is technically a blemish, making it unsuitable for akrava. Once it's up there, leave it up there. Why? Because this particular slight blemish is potentially acceptable as a carbon. In which carbon? By the bird carbonis. A bird carbon is only disqualified if he's really missing a limb, but this type of slight blemish doesn't disqualify bird carbon. So since there is some opening for this type of phenomenon on the mizbeach, so even if it's an animal, you leave it up there. Since it would be acceptable by a bird. First condition. Second condition is timing. It's only allowed to stay up if the animal became a carbon before it got blemished. But let's say the blemish preceded the hagdish, it comes down. And the Gemara continues, so although we find a similar, let's call it deficiency, which is if the animal is a female, an oila can only be a zachar, a male. If it's a female, what happens then? If it goes up in the mizbeach, can she take it down? Yeah, you would take it down. Why? You could ask, what do you mean? By a bird carbon, even a female is acceptable. So if you have potential allowance elsewhere, i.e. by the bird, you should allow the animal through as well. No, because it doesn't conform to timing. The timing condition that we just mentioned. The command, the kadam muma, like they should dumb. It's as though the mum preceded the hailer because she was an akeva before she became a karban. Okay, so that's the eloch. Quoted by Rabbi Yochanan. Masiv Rabbi Zera has a kasha Rabbi Yochanan. From the Brisa just learned. Hamalav and bechutz pater. So we have a list of, in edibles, bones, and hooves. One item is the shlil, right? The fetus, the undeveloped fetus. If he takes it and offers it on an altar outside the mizbeach, outside the Beis HaMikdash, she's pater. So the flesh of the shlil, it's not technically part of the korban. It's not meant for hakrava. You're pater. Let's make an inference, a diuk. However, but me'iman, had he taken flesh, we're talking about flesh, right? The shlil is flesh of the mother, which is the actual korban, and burn it outside the Beis HaMikdash, then it would be chayev. How could it be chayev? The only option would be, the only situation which would consider a person liable for burning flesh outside the mikdash is an oila, where the entire unit, the entire animal, including its flesh, is meant to be served on mizbeach. That flesh, which is mizbeach material, taken outside, incurs, liability for being mala b'chutz. Give me an example of chiyuv for burning basar outside the mikdash. But listen, the only way would be oila. And apparently she's a female because she has a shlil, a fetus. We're talking about the same animal. Again, you take the meat, burn it outside. Are you chayiv? It depends. Of the offspring, you're pater. Of the mother animal, of the same, set, the same family, the mother animal of this, right? Inevitably has to be an oila, otherwise there's nothing to talk about. Chiyuv of outside, by basar. So, we're talking about an oila and a keva. Hold it. Why would it be chayiv for offering the basar of that oila outside? It's not mizbeach material. It's not even potentially mizbeach material, as we just learned. Oilas nekeva has no room on the mizbeach at all. Even according to Rekiva, v'yamas b'shleima, because savar Rekiva oilas nekeva imos leiter. Yeah, it would work well if you could consider that Rekiva would, in fact, allow even oila and nekeva to stay on the mizbeach. No. So it would be regarded somewhat as mizbeach material. And that would explain why if he does it outside the mikdash is chayiv. Hamani, Rabbi Kiva. So this brisa reflects the Rabbi Kiva's sheet. But according to you, Eli Amji, tell me, imol sateret. Oilas in the cave has no business at all in the Beis HaMikdash. Hamani. So who's speaking in this brisa? Who would consider him guilty of being mala b'chutz if it's just flesh of an oila nekeva, which has no relevance in the Beis HaMikdash, has no connection to the mikdash? Answers the Gemara. Ema, let's reanalyze the brisa a bit differently. Hamalim min b'chutz pat. So the brisa says, if you take the shlil, the undeveloped fetus, offer it on a mizbeach, on an altar outside the mikdash, pater, right? Because the shlil is not part and parcel of the korban. But the inference will be, instead of speaking about flesh of the mother, which is not relevant, but, however, which situation would incur liability for doing the same thing? Me'imurei iman chayiv. We're talking about not an oila. Oila cannot come as an akeva, as we explained. We're talking about a shlamim or a chatas, which can be brought as an akeva as well, right? So this shlil that we're discussing is a shlil of a shlamim or a chatas, which is a valid legal korban, even if it's female. And that's all the brisa is saying. If you take a shlil outside, your pater. But if you take something from the mother, like the emurim, the fats of the mother, which are meant for the mizbeach, it's legitimate korban material, then it's chayiv. That solves our issue. V'amhen ketani. Hold it, we're speaking about the flesh here, not fats. V'iman dumi didu. We assume the brisa is speaking in a consistent, correlating way, meaning we're contrasting the mother to the offspring. We have to be consistent. The same material, whereby which by the offspring would be pater, by the mother would be chayiv. So you can't switch. You can't go from meat to fat. That's inconsistent. It's not a proper diuk. You have to find a parallel factor. So mehen katani means the flesh of the shlil. V'iman dumididu, and in contrast to the mother, in a similar item to the child, meaning the flesh, not the fats. Ela'ema, rather, let's go like this. Hamala memurein b'chutz pater. And the brisa says, the shlil outside is pater. It's not the meat of the shlil. It's the imurim of the shlil, the fats of the shlil. Take it outside, your pater, it doesn't belong anywhere. And the inference would be, yeah. But the same exact material, if it were by the mother, he'd be chayiv. Yeah, that makes sense. Home imurim imon chayiv. But if you take the same fat material from the mother animal, which is a chatas, which is shlam, legitimate, valid carbon, instead of bringing it on the mizbeach, take it outside, and he's chayiv for offering it outside the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, that resolves that issue. Okay, let's do a quick recap. According to Rabbi Yehuda, would collect some of the blood after, bringing many karbanos, just in case something got spilled out. Rabbanan disagree. Rabbanan say they would just plug it up just for beauty's sake, to show the, their dedication to the avodah and the abundance of karbanos. We solved the issue of dirtying the clothing, and we had a Mishnah. Pigul is strictly where he's intending on consuming something which is consumable, whether personal or mizbeach. You can't mix and match. Going to Bavli, you could mix and match. But it has to be something which is part and parcel of the carbon, as opposed to eggs, milk, or things which are inedible or barely edible. Going to Bavli, shlil and shuli are exceptions. They're edible, so even though they're secondary components, they can be dragged along, be swept along. They can't be serve as conduits and trigger points to pigul, but once the carbon becomes pigul, they're included as well. And we actually proved it from the diuk in the Mishnah, which Rav presented at the end over here. Then we discussed something called kivin she'olay layered. According to Rabbi Akiva, even a slight blemish would allow for leaving on the mizbeach, because it's allowable by the birds, but that wouldn't work by Elis Nekeva. We had a couple of questions which were resolved. Okay, all the best to you, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.